Well, you have to be of a certain age to know that song. I suspect that Dan does and Talia doesn't. But anyway, um, welcome all of you to this podcast on entitled "The Courtroom is Battlefield," and the topic that we're going to discuss today is the use of the courtroom as the courtroom and law in conflict simulation. And we have our fourth guest joining us now, Sam.
Hello.
My God, it all worked smoothly. Thank you, StreamYard, for this amazing technology that even I can manage to comprehend and manipulate. Um, we are joined today by four designers, all of whom either have published a game that utilizes the law as a source of conflict, or in Talia's case, soon will publish a game that uses the law as a source of conflict. And to sort of kick off, why don't we start with Alex and proceed alphabetically, um, and have you talk a little bit. I think all of you have only one design, or in Sam's case, a series of games about the law. But why don't you talk a little bit about those games and your approach that you used in them, Al?
Sure. So I've designed a game called Treason on the trial of Louis Riel, who, if you're not familiar with, he's probably closest American analogy would be almost like an Aaron Burr type figure in Canada. And so he had led a previous rebellion in what's modern day Manitoba, and had to flee down to the States afterwards, and then became an American citizen, and then was kind of called back up by the Métis people in Canada to be their leader, because they had a lot of grievances against the federal government, and led a second rebellion, and that he was captured and put on trial for treason. So one person plays the prosecutor, one person plays the defense in this trial game.
And in your case, it's about a historical trial, and really about the courtroom experience.
Yes.
Terrific. Dan, you have done some work on a game, interestingly, in about the Salem witch trials, which are both kind of extrajudicial and colonial American judicial, which is to say, very kind of catch as catch can procedurally and whatnot. Talk a little bit about your game and the approach that you use there.
Sure, and a number of concepts in the current law came about because of how haphazard and crazy that was. So the game I designed in 2017 is called Affliction, Salem 1692. I was just going to name it 1692, and somebody else said everyone's going to think it's about Christopher Columbus. So I didn't do that. I was like,
America.
Yeah, you're right. They will.
200 years off.
It doesn't matter. They would. Anyway. And then the second thing, I'm like, there's no witches in this game, and people gave me a hard time about that too. Anyway, so it's a historically accurate game about the Salem witch trials, and you're using accusations to reduce people's reputation of the people you don't like, to try to make it easier to arrest them, and bring people into your circle that you do like to try to protect them. It doesn't actually get to the trial phase or hanging. It's more the takes you to the arrest part. But in terms of, I did a ton of research. The only problem was it was back in 2016, and I'm old, so there's some things I may have forgotten. But that's the core of that game.
I'm curious, because I've been up to Salem, but I don't remember this part of the trials. Were the trials themselves? I mean, was the arrest and and basically indictment all there was to it? Were the trials show trials, or did anybody who was ever accused of being a witch manage to get out from under the hangman's noose?
So actually, everyone, I believe everyone, there might have been one exception. Everyone that confessed to being a witch was not hanged. So it was only if you denied being a witch, because they wanted to keep the people that admitted being a witch to alive, because they wanted to grill them to find out who the other witches were. So if you denied it, that's when you had problem. And Giles Corey is the only person in American history to ever be pressed to death. And so there were procedures, and so he needed to plea, and he refused to plea because his wife was hanged. And if he was found guilty, then he would lose his property and his children wouldn't get his property. So he refused to plea. So they piled stones on him for 2 days. He was 71 years old, I believe, for 2 days. And
more weight.
So his last words, Samuel, correct. His last words were more weight, which I believe is FU in Puritan, crazy stuff. There was a judge, and there was procedure, but there was things like there was no double jeopardy. So Reverend Burroughs gets tried 3 times until they find him guilty. And he only came back to town to pay a debt. But there's some nutso stuff there, yeah.
Yeah. And a number of people just died in prison.
Yeah. It was they threw you in a barn, and you were supposed to pay for your own food and housing when you got out. So if you were wealthy, though, good thing that's all changed. If you're wealthy, you don't have more advantages than if you're poor.
Yes.
It's all fair. Justice is all fair now.
Yeah, exactly. Sam, you have the distinction, perhaps, of being the only game designer in this space who has successfully created a franchise. Like your games are not. There have been a lot of games in this general space, and most of them are failures. And you have done what seems incredible and
present company excluded.
No, these are I found the 3 other people who've done games that are well regarded.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. Yes, yeah.
But that's all we got. You're looking at the whole universe.
Yeah, it's tricky.
But tell me a little bit about your game. It is, I know, like Al's, also a game that deals with the courtroom experience and perhaps a little more courtroom procedure than Dan's design. But it's hypothetical cases, with the exception maybe of your Salem witchcraft.
It's not. The witch trial is not Salem on purpose. Yeah.
It's not Salem. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Just very inspired by such things. But I wanted, me and my co-designer Mike, who can't be here, we talked a lot about it, both interested in the law, and wanted to come up with a game that was expandable, that touched a lot of different periods and a lot of different types of trials, which is difficult because the legal proceedings are very narrative driven. Like lawyers trying to tell their stories. So even though there is a lot of rules and regulations and procedures and stuff in the law, each trial, right, is very narrative driven, which is what invokes, a lot of the movies and the shows, right? You don't have a lot of movies about people doing tax law. It's always about, the murder trial, the courtroom drama of it all. But so we just did a lot of work in trying to come up with a base system that could then be flexible for a lot of different cases. And then we kind of sat there and brainstormed 15, 20 different ideas, and then, limited them down to, what we thought was the most interesting, and kind of released it in there. And I wanted, this kind of came out of the desire to have a drafting game. Like I like to draft Magic and all that, without needing to buy a bunch of, packs of these collectible card games. but having variety. So it was important to have these different cases. So once you played one case a while, you could just switch to another case and have a whole new experience.
So you're saying lawyers are like a goblin deck, something like that.
Well, I mean, some could be, yeah. Depending on the case and the strategy, you got to rush. You got to rush your case with a bunch of, evidence and witnesses before and overwhelm your opposition before they get a chance to investigate and figure stuff out.
There you go. Everything I knew about the law I learned from Magic.
Yeah.
Talia, your game is the broadest in scope of these games and looks over a great deal of history in one play experience. Tell us a little bit about your design and its broader approach.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I mean, it was very much inspired by Twilight Struggle and Founding Fathers. And when we were playtesting 1989 Dawn of Freedom, it was Jason who said that he had never really cracked the nut of doing a game about the history of the Supreme Court. That was about 10 years ago. And so I've been working on the game for a little while with Jason's help as a developer. And it tries to put the players in a position of being an institution or a school of thought that has been around for 200 years, and to play sort of an area majority game on to control the composition of the court, so the 9 justices on the court, and to control the parties that win cases, and Maryland v. McCullough or Marbury v. Madison or Brown v. Board. And so you're sort of trying to, as the cases come along, predict and influence which parties win, and win those cases for yourself. And it all sort of revolves around a tug of war that is loosely inspired by the score track in Twilight Struggle. You have these 4 tug of wars you're doing over whether different provisions of the Constitution will be interpreted in a more federalist or anti-federalist way. So that's the Commerce Clause and the First Amendment and things like that. So it definitely tries to do a lot in 2 hours, cover 200 years, and hopefully coming out in a matter of months, fingers crossed.
Can you buy the justices' Winnebagos? Or?
You can put your clerks on the justices to help them get onto the court, and then the justices will remember that you helped them get on the court, and that will allow you to earn more renown. So
cool.
Yeah. Yes, I guess.
So the whole game is about Clarence Thomas's experience on the court, is what you're saying.
The whole game, as you've said, is a pretty cynical look at the history of the court, but it's I don't know. It's a tug of war, card driven, historical. I mean, and it has the eras obviously that's inspired by Through the Ages or Twilight Struggle, right? You're sort of playing through the first 50, 60 years, and then the next 60, 70 years, and then a modern era.
I kind of know this a little bit, but for the purposes of our audience, Al, why don't you lead off and let us know about your experience with the law, your personal experience and exposure, and how that might have encouraged you to make a game like this.
Sure. So I'm a trial lawyer. I'm a criminal defense trial lawyer.
You're a real lawyer.
And one thing I learned pretty early on in practicing law is you win or lose the case at jury selection. If the case is winnable, you win or lose it at jury selection. And I've won cases I had no business winning because I got a great jury, and I've lost cases I should have won because I had a bad jury. And so I wanted to make a game where, selecting the jury was just so important. And the reason I picked high treason in the trial of Louis Riel is that's the only capital case that I'm familiar with, at least, that only had 6 jurors as opposed to 12. that was one of his appeals, saying, hey, you can't convict me and sentence me to death. I didn't have 12 jurors. And just for gameplay purposes, 12 jurors, that's kind of a lot to manage. So I wanted to do Louis Rial's trial with just the 6 jurors.
And the voir dire process in that game is really one of the things that makes it stand out. So I think you really nailed that target. Dan, do you have any? You have lawyer parents? Are you a lawyer? Did something go wrong in life that led you into the law?
A criminal record or no? Not really. The Affliction game kind of came sideways from that, which was there was another game that has since disappeared. So let's not confuse it with one that's out. And I think its tagline was, "You play the good guys hanging witches." And I was like, oh my God, that is so not what happened. And so it was more of I've always been interested in history. So it was more of a history propelled me to do this game than an interest in law. I used to, I'm a retired counselor, and we used to do a crime scene every year for the college biology class. And so we would murder a mannequin somewhere, and the kids would have to come in, and they all thought it was going to be like TV, and they found out it was like paperwork, really. And then they would come in on a Saturday morning. Imagine that, a bunch of high school seniors coming in on a Saturday morning and interviewing our friends who were suspects and witnesses. And then they'd have to present to a grand jury eventually. So
that's a super interesting classroom experience.
It was very cool. And the sheriff's department was all in. Like they would help us out every year. It was crazy good. But I think, my one legal experience was interesting. Back in college, I took a criminal justice class and was kind of thinking of going that way. And they brought in 2 lawyers at different times. And one was a new lawyer who's a defense attorney. And someone asked her, how do you defend someone you know was an axe murderer? And she, struggled a little. And she's like, this all relates to board gaming, by the way. She struggled a little and was like, well, we got to protect people's rights, and, answered the question. 2 weeks later, there was an attorney, been an attorney for like 15 years, and asked him the same question. And he said, because I want to win. And I'm like, oh, I got him. So to you, it's like a chess match. And he said, exactly. I was like, whoa. I decided maybe a different career for me after that. But it was kind of interesting that he saw this as a game. Essentially, he goes into court and there's his set of rules that he's going to play by, and he's going to try to win each game.
A lot of strange people go into the law. No offense, Al, of course. Sam, do you have any legal exposure? Are you zooming in from prison as we speak?
No, I considered for a while being a lawyer, but it was too much school for me, so I became a rules lawyer instead.
The worst kind of all.
Well, I write the rules, so it's
right.
And part of it was what Dan touches on is I kind of, if I was a defense attorney, I was always worried about defending someone who I thought was guilty and not being able to do a good job, or prosecuting someone who I was sure was innocent. So in the end, I was like, I could be a judge, though. That would be fun. And I can make my own decisions. And my co-designer has also been someone interested in the law. His best friend is a lawyer. And so we both kind of just, talked about, hey, why isn't there a lot of law games? Like we got, 50 games about dwarves and pirates and all sorts of other things. Like why not the law? So
indeed, it is inherently dramatic.
Yeah.
Also, as you say, as your rules writing, you are functionally creating your own little legal system.
Yeah. You got to think of all the ways that people can exploit it beforehand, and close those loopholes, but also incentivize people to act in good ways and disincentivize them from acting in bad ways, even with soft rules rather than hard rules sometimes.
Indeed. So Talia, you are an actual law journal law student from a prestigious law school, who then went into firm life, and then wisely escaped. Tell us a little bit about your legal background and its relationship to your game design.
Yeah, I wasn't sure what to do after college, and so I did go to law school in New York City for a bit, and then ended up at a big 1,000-person Wall Street law firm for a couple of years, but managed to leave and come down to DC, where I've worked in public media law ever since. So not real law like Alex Al in the courtroom. I don't go to courtrooms. I do regulatory compliance with the FCC and contracts and licensing and that sort of law. So, but was able to meet Jason when I moved down to DC and joined his game group. And so always been really interested in the Supreme Court, but I'm not a litigator by any means. But I think it's an area that most of the people who play tested the game, I think, are not lawyers, don't have particular knowledge about the law. But I think most Americans, at least, if not people all over, are at least somewhat interested in the goings-on of the Supreme Court and the power that those folks hold and have held, and the just really memorable decisions over the years. So I don't think you have to be a lawyer to just be interested in it. But when I start getting into Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, sometimes the non-lawyer's eyes glaze over.
Indeed. That was
one of the most memorable parts of law school, was when you get to constitutional law and you think you're going to get a whole semester about free speech and freedom of religion, and then the entire semester is Article 1, Section 8, the Commerce Clause, and the scope of those 3 words of that provision of the Constitution. So that's one of the tracks that you're fighting over.
Indeed. Al, you're an American. You're American, right? You're not a Canadian who moved here.
No, I am a Canadian who moved here. But
you are a Canadian who moved here.
Yeah.
And you sound as if you've actually lost whatever residual Canadian accent was once there.
I'm from Vancouver, which is really just Seattle North. You don't have the thick accent.
I grew up on San Juan Island, so I'm right near Vancouver.
Yeah.
There you go. You guys are practically neighbors.
Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit about the distinction, and therefore the distinction in the game between English colonial law, which I guess is what is being enforced in high treason, and what most Americans, for instance, the jury size, most obviously. How is that legal in Canada at the time? Right.
Well, I mean, it wasn't. And so that was one of his appeals, was saying, you can't do this. You can't sentence me to death. I didn't get 12 jurors. That's basic common law, that you're entitled to 12 on a capital case. He didn't, but the government wanted him dead, so he died.
So 6 is acceptable on a non-capital case in Canada?
I never studied Canadian law, right? So I went to law school.
You only studied American law.
Yeah. So I don't want to opine on something, but I assume, certain cases you're entitled to different jurors. Even here in America, right? You can get a jury of 3, you can get a jury of 6. It really varies, just depending on the kind of case you're facing. So
I believe in Canadian law, you only can have 6 jurors in a civil case.
There you go. So it's really just the 12 Angry Men thing is an aspect of the common law that relates to capital crime.
Yeah.
That makes good sense. Tell us a little bit also, though, Louis Riel, that the game in general is focused on this interesting racial fault line that was, I guess, true at the time in Canada, that the British government had made more or less accommodation for First Nations, but they had ignored mixed race people in Canada, which seemed to be the focus of his first rebellion. Is that a fault line that still exists in Canada? Have you heard players react to it after trying your game?
I met a Métis individual down at Board Game Geek convention one time, and he was I think initially hesitant and worried about how it would have been portrayed in the trial, but after playing it, he seemed to enjoy it quite a bit. So I'm not that familiar with current situation in Canada, but with the native tribes, they would have had treaties guaranteeing them certain rights and stuff, and so the Métis people didn't get exactly the same protections that the original natives would have. So that kind of caused some conflict, because the Métis then became quite a big group within Canada.
Are the Métis mostly French speaking?
Yeah, so it'd be mostly French speaking, but I think there were also non-French speakers as well, but it's mostly French speaking. Again, I really don't want to opine on it too much, because I'm not an expert or even that knowledgeable in any way.
That's very needlessly modest of you.
Yeah. So basically, I didn't do a lot of other research for the game other than basic background reading, and then I got the entire trial transcripts and then built the game off what actually happened in the trial, as opposed to a lot of additional background reading. So,
Dan, was one of the motion, or you talked a little bit about your interest in history and sort of correcting the record about putting witches on trial, the good guys putting witches on trial. Was this does your game design serve kind of a historical correction function? Is that what, are you trying to correct the record? Is this
no.
the crucible of board gaming?
No, you are disgusting, horrible people. So you basically play like a family. You play a faction. So maybe you're trying to protect the Proctors, but you hate the Putnams. And so it's more politically influenced in terms of what you're doing there. So I suppose you could not arrest some people. Every time someone arrests Ann Putnam, I'm like, she was the only one of the girls to ever apologize. And so, but that it's a simulation, I guess. So it can go differently, of course, but it's still going to be ugly.
When you look back through the characters that you read so much about, obviously there's this kind of cynical revenge-taking and social dynamic that's an important part of the historical experience. Mm-hmm. But were there any heroes as far as you were concerned? Yeah.
So in the game, you can also use fear, and you can fearmonger. And so the opposite of that, things that created doubt, like, the people started wondering how many witches can there be amongst us, and the pressure eventually shifted. And so there were, so George Burroughs, who I actually alluded to before, was a minister who came back to pay a debt, eventually was found guilty. And when they had the noose around his neck, he recited the Lord's Prayer. Well, Cotton Mather had written a book 10 years ago saying no witch can say the Lord's Prayer. And as evidence of that, there was an Irish woman who didn't speak English 10 years ago, was previous. and they tried to teach her the Lord's Prayer, and she couldn't quite say it right, so therefore she was a witch. So Burroughs says the Lord's Prayer precisely, and the crowd starts like, wait, we can't hang him. And Cotton Mather just happens to be there, and he says, well, even the devil can disguise himself as an angel sometimes, and they hang him. But it was sort of a turning point, because there's the people were just as intelligent or not as intelligent as they are today, and there was there was people trying to object to this and thought it was terrible. There was a constable, Willard, who refused to arrest anyone from the start, but he was eventually hung as a witch, because why wouldn't he arrest any of them if he wasn't one of them? So there's a number of characters in there that actual people that tried to do the right thing, tried to fight against what was happening, and many of them did not have a very good ending.
Sad but true.
Yeah.
Sam, you talked a little bit about the inherent drama that is part of the legal experience that people think of, right? Which is usually courtroom trials, maybe a divorce, anyway, something theatrical. Tell me a little bit about what about conflict, what salient points of conflict in a trial context do you and your co-designer you and Mike try and capture in Lawyer Up?
Yeah, I mean, the trickiness of a real trial is that it is so much of a story, which is why it's easy. There is a draw more to having a specific case done, because you can touch on all those different elements. It's a bit harder to kind of tell the story in the potential story in pieces, which is what we try to do by having the different witnesses and the different evidence, and having different avenues of possibility, right? There is no definitive guilty party in any of the Lawyer Up games per se. I mean, the Mafia one, the guy is obviously guilty, but you can whack witnesses and tamper with the jury and stuff like that. But usually there's like evidence that's for and evidence against, and try to kind of have that balance. But I guess the drama moments is having a lot of mechanical like counters or conditional effects as you play through. So there's like counter argument, which allows you to, if the top card of your opponent's examination is an argument, you can discard it and get rid of that, which can change the whole game, because one of the main mechanics is like matching bias, informing your argument with evidence and stuff by matching the symbols. So if you get rid of a card that they were planning on matching, it can disrupt their whole line of questioning. And then the other thing, of course, is objections. Objections has always been a key part of a lot of lawyer drama, of switching the case around. So there's a limited amount of objections that each player has that they can use to get rid of an argument and cancel it before it's played, and that leads to a lot of interesting drama moments.
Yeah, that's awesome. You alluded to the fact that your witch trial expansion isn't based expressly on the Salem witch trials, but I'm curious, as you and Mike have gone through the process of kind of trying to come up with additional scenarios, have you used historical trials as like inspiration? Is it easier to go off of, hey, well, this famous, we're not going to use the names, but we're basically basing this scenario on a famous case?
Yeah, usually that's the case. Like, there's usually some sort of inspiration of some sort. The base case that we did is just a murder trial that's very like Law and Order. Rich heiress is found covered in blood over her dead, father, and she's being tried. But there's a lot of, drama and stuff going on. But one of the other cases that's in season 1 is an art forgery case, which is based on EU law. But that one was inspired by me reading a book about art forgery, and like you having the, having to find a painting that is that old and then stripping all the color out of it so you have the right crackulature in the paint, and then doing the paint over it and then baking it, because oil like naturally take like 100 years to fully dry, so you've got to like bake it slowly. And just, it was really interesting, all the process and stuff that goes into creating these real forgeries of old paintings. And so I don't know, that inspired me, and so we kind of did a case about that. And same thing, like Salem witch trials inspired, of course, my witch trial. And then in the new season 2, we've got like a divorce case, celebrity divorce, which was in part inspired by some of the recent celebrity divorces that have happened. That some people may have watched the whole case of. Yeah, and then we've got like a casino heist case, which is like Ocean's 11 kind of inspired kind of stuff, and Mike really likes like mafia stuff, so that's why we had like the mafia thing. And then we had kind of a pulp noir type case where the defendant is being framed by a conspiracy, so you're investigating to try to prove their innocence at the same time that they're trying to struggle in court against this case that's completely stacked against them. So yeah, kind of, it's always an inspiration point for sure.
That stands to reason. I guess you guys are a little bit like you're like crime television show writers. You're probably scanning the headlines to find additional. Hey, that's a weird case.
Yeah,
game expansion.
we have a big list. Like we have stuff of like, oh, what if let's do like a cyberpunk-esque case where an android is being charged with murder, and like you've got people going, well, they can't be charged with murder, they're not a human, like you should charge the person who programmed them or something, right? Like, or one of the games that Mike does is this post-apocalyptic game called Maximum Apocalypse, and we're like, let's have a trial where it's who stole the food. You're all survivors in a camp, and the judge is the dog. It's just so we have a huge list of possible cases to fit into it. That'd be really cool.
That's awesome. Talia, your game deals with, I guess, almost all of the most important Supreme Court decisions around civil rights cases, and a lot of landmark cases, and all the landmark cases are basically in the game. Tell us a little bit about how you deal, or what tension you felt in having a game where players can be on the wrong side of Brown versus Board, or any of the major civil rights cases. How did you grapple with that concern?
Yeah, it's a good question, and something I thought about a lot, and I hope players grapple with it when they're playing. I think that there's tough cases in there on all sorts of issues, right? There's Commerce Clause cases about child labor. There's speech cases about whether or not pacifists should be able to urge the cessation of weapons production during World War I. But there are equality cases like Dred Scott and Brown v. Board and New York v. Lemon. There's 24 cases in the game. A lot of opportunity for players to take different sides on all sorts of cases. So you can come to the game and say, I've been assigned to play the Louisiana Attorney General's office, or I've been assigned to play this or that school of thought or that institution. And that's what I'm going to sort of bring to how I advocate on these cases. But, you can also play it very tactically and sort of go with the flow of what justices are coming out in that particular game, where the philosophy tracks are at an even time, and sort of try to maximize your points, your renown. But hopefully players do sort of pause and think about it before they put a clerk down on a party that they maybe find reprehensible or incompatible with their views. But at the same time, definitely thought about, should all those cases come out? But that wouldn't really be any sort of representation of history. And hopefully people will see the historical supplement book that will be alongside the rule book and learn a little bit about those cases and how recent some of these cases, like Loving v. Virginia, are, that are sort of just startling to, like, I remember getting to law school in 2004 and being pretty sheltered and pretty like not aware, and just being flabbergasted that things like Loving v. Virginia and Lawrence v. Texas like had to be decided in recent memory. So it's not easy, but it's not that dissimilar from, I think, some of the cards you end up playing as the Soviets or the Americans in Twilight Struggle, or some of the decisions you might end up making in Memoir 44. So it's that's kind of my thinking on it.
That's a good segue to the second kind of secondary question to that, which is the Supreme Court is in a particularly politically contentious era in its history. I saw the other day that it had the lowest approval rating of the American public since they have been tracking the Supreme Court's approval rating. Do you think that impacts this game coming out? Does that help with your sales? Does it hurt with your sales? Do people want to even deal with it?
I don't know how many people want to play a 2-hour game with 16 pages or 20 pages of rules to begin with, but I also think that the Supreme Court has always been so important, and I sort of always chafe against historical exceptionalism arguments about this moment being so different. I think the court was incredibly contentious in 1954, when Brown v. Board was decided. I think that we like to think this moment is very unique, but I think it's, people have been beating each other on the floor of the Congress with canes for a very long time. So,
that was one time in 1860.
One time.
Let's go with that.
One time.
I think that the approval rating is more tied to like social media and the like democratization of like the ability to express and share opinions and rile people up, and like the algorithmic sort of like generation of engagement. But so I think the court has always been so powerful and so contentious and so fascinating, because going back all the way to like McCulloch v. Maryland, or like Tinker, or Hammer v. Dagenhart, NLRB. I mean, the court had such a role in the New Deal, and whether or not, how much of it was actually possible. So hopefully that sparks a little interest in just some of the huge things the court did in the 30s, in the 1800s, that, have always really shaped, like, for hundreds of years.
Indeed. Well, that leads me to ask, and we'll go in reverse order this year, Talia. Who is your favorite fictional or non-fictional lawyer? Like, when you were a little kid, who was the person who inspired you?
No, I think when I was a little kid, it was astronauts that were inspiring me. But I mean,
those guys get all the damn attention.
I think it's a pretty cliche answer to say Atticus Finch is pretty inspiring, and as long as you don't read the second book that just came out a few years ago. And as a sci-fi nerd, I love Battlestar Galactica, and so I don't remember his name, but the lawyer in the that trial of Gaius Baltar, it was really fun. So I'll go with those two.
Roma Lampkin.
There you go, Lampkin. Yes.
Nicely done.
I've played way too many games of Battlestar Galactica.
Sam, do you have a favorite fictional legal character?
Yeah, I mean, I just got done watching The Good Wife and The Good Fight pretty good legal series, and so there's a lot of lawyers in there. But one thing they do really good, especially in the Good Wife, is have really interesting judges that are recurring that'll have like their own kind of like biases and ways. So like some of them, but both Lisa Flockhart, which is the main character, who's not a great person but is a great lawyer, in part because they're not a great person, so they're doing a lot of great defenses against people who are obviously murderers and stuff like that. And Elsbeth Tassioni, who is someone that they portray as being very much on the spectrum, but someone who has throws their opponents off because of that. Utilizes that of being they're kind of weird and kooky, and people don't take them for what they're worth, and they just come in with these powerful legal arguments because they actually have prepared well and trick them. So it works. Yeah. So it's good show.
Dan, you have a
oh yeah, I'd have to say it was Alex Berry.
It's true. Also, Alex Berry, very, very big.
Fictional being a problem in that answer. I was thinking way too hard about it, so I don't think so. I was here trying to go through, like, Sam Waterston. I don't know.
Yeah, whatever. Not really. Although I like Sam Waterston as an actor.
Yeah, but none of that was really very accurate. So,
fair. Al, you must have a favorite lawyer.
Yeah, I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Anatomy of a Murder.
Yes.
Yeah, with Jimmy Stewart's character, I think he's the best. It's the most realistic of any of the law movies or shows I've seen. So
that we at my law library in law school, they had a legal movie section, but they would only allow legal movies that the law librarians thought were close enough, like they got enough detail. So they would allow you to check those out. This is, of course, when videotapes were still a thing. So back when we all used Westlaw and blah 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 blah. Let's talk briefly about other legal cases or legal subjects that you guys think and gal think would make. Since we have so few games on the subject, what other conflicts should we be doing? What other legal conflicts should we be doing in game design? Al?
Well, two that I'm working on very, very slowly. One is the Nuremberg Trials, a Nuremberg Trials game. I think that's interesting.
A nice light subject, for a fun afternoon.
Yeah, exactly. And the other one is probably just as light. It's the trial. I'm probably going to pronounce it because I've only read it. I've never heard it pronounced. But the trial of Sargoman Talarian. And so he assassinated Talat Pasha in Berlin in 1921, one of the kind of architects of the Armenian genocide. And so he was tried for murder and found not guilty. Not guilty by reason of temporary insanity. And I think it's really fascinating. And it's almost kind of a case of jury nullification where just the jury had the ability to use the NGRI to really effectively jury nullify. And it's a very unique piece of history, right? Because it was like how the German legal system worked in that brief moment of time in Weimar Germany in the 1920s. And so I think that's just, to me, a very unique and important trial in history. So those are the two I'm slowly working on and I think are fascinating.
There's an old solo design on the Nuremberg trials, and that is reasonably well regarded. But I'm curious, any lawyer who's spent any time with the Nuremberg trials knows that actually the legal questions are very, very, very easy to argue on both sides, honestly. You may not want to defend Nazis, but in terms of the law, it's what's going on in Nuremberg has a lot of odd precedent to it. You can you can be a person in very good standing who thinks that the defense has the better argument. But how are you going to grapple with this question of putting someone in the position of defending Goering or whomever?
Sure. So I've got it. It's a up to 4-player game where the players are playing the different 4 prosecution teams. So there's the French player, Russian player, British player, and American player. And you've got different goals. So like at the beginning of the game, you got secret goals. So like as the Russians, you want to make sure these 4 guys get killed, right? And the French want these 4 guys to have life imprisonment. The British player wants these 4 guys to have a definitive term of imprisonment, but not necessarily life imprisonment, like 20 years or something. And the Americans want, these 4 people, I think in real life, 3 people got acquitted. So 4 people, they need to try and get acquitted. So everyone has secret goals that they're working on.
That's super interesting. That'll be a very interesting design.
Yeah.
And the Americans want everybody released for their space program or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this idea,
The Americans are the Cylon.
Yeah.
Oh, you're a rocket scientist? Not guilty. Not guilty.
Yeah, we need some of those, right? So this idea I've been developing for over the past 45 seconds. So, it's fleshed out. But, maybe a game that is like Jury, and it's a multiplayer game where you're all members of a jury, but you each have agendas, hidden secret agendas, and the case flows through the players, and what you're saying and trying to convince people of, they don't know why. On the surface of it, it may seem like a very valid argument, but underneath, you're trying to meet some other objective.
Yeah, I think the jury perspective is definitely interesting and invites kind of a group game dynamic. I don't see why not. Sam, any other hot cases you're working on? When are we getting an OJ expansion?
No. I mean, there's a reason we kind of had a rule of not to touch directly and do real cases, in part because they can be sensitive, and in part because it's just a lot of research to get it right. So doing inspired by allows, a little bit more freedom and a little bit more lightness to it. But I think part of what people have been mentioning so far touches on one of the difficulties of doing a legal game, is that inherently it's like a 2-person, head-to-head kind of thing, which is not always the most popular or successful type of game. So, coming up with a lot of kind of workarounds to that, like coming up with ways to do a multiplayer or factioned or hidden identities, social aspects. But I would love to see a game about treaty negotiation between multiple parties, which is one of the cases that we've discussed that I have some notes for, but allowing there to be multiple players still arguing around central legal issues. And with a treaty, you not only have what's been previously established or with the conflicts, but you have all those agendas, some public, some hidden, and a lot of that push and pull that kind of makes things interesting. So,
well, I will give a shout out to Maurice Suckling, who is got a design, should be out, I guess, next year or something, called Peace 1905, which is it's just a 2 or 3 player game about the Treaty of Northampton ending the Russo-Japanese War, which is about as obscure as you could possibly ask for it, but nevertheless a very interesting subject.
Yeah, it still had a huge impact on our world history. We just don't, a lot of people just don't know about it.
Indeed.
Didn't Teddy Roosevelt win the Peace Prize for Nobel
Yes,
Peace
he
Prize?
won the Peace Prize, and so the third player,
first American to do so.
Yeah, exactly, all those things. So there's a lot of interesting history around that treaty, and the fact that we played intermediary is interesting in and of itself.
And I see
Talia, I know your next game it's actually about koalas, but do you have are there other legal subjects that you think need or deserve.
Well, so
further
my next game was going to be spaceships, but you decided it had to be about koala bears. So now it will be about koalas and kangaroos.
In space.
Sadly, not in space. The publisher said they don't want any more space games. It'll be just in Australia. But no, I mean, if I were to do another legal game, I would definitely do it not about courtrooms or litigation, which I think I've had enough of for one lifetime, and would try to see if it were possible to do something focused. Since I'm a telecom lawyer who does like regulatory law with the Federal Communications Commission, I did a lot of work on something called the Broadcast Spectrum Incentive Auction years ago, which it was a really interesting two-sided auction that I spent years of my life helping to shape the rules for. And then there were party broadcasters and cellular companies involved in they described it, the regulators, as the most complicated auction in human history, but I don't think they've played like, Merchants of Amsterdam or Medici. So it would be a legal game in the sense that you would be like shaping the regulations of how this incentive auction would work, but then an auction game potentially. And I don't know. I've been thinking about it for a few years, but I'll wait until these first two games are out of my hands completely, and then I can think about if there's a telecom regulatory law game that could exist.
Fantastic. Does anybody have any? We're coming up on the end of our time, and so I wanted to give. If anybody has any last comments, I'd be happy to.
Well, in the chat, they're talking about you're offering trips to Bali, or.
Yeah, that is Kevin, but yeah, probably because
I need to get my trip to Bali or to Kangaroo Island.
The Kangaroo
Trial of Socrates. I want to play that game now, so that sounds great.
And Evan here wrote a Kangaroo Court game. I don't know if you guys saw it.
Exactly. Yeah. That's amazing. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to say sci-fi, the sci-fi stuff, like that's if Lawyer Up gets another expansion, we want to do like cyberpunk-esque with sci-fi. Are people human? Our consciousness of androids, or like megacorp civil case kind of class action, and deal with the sci-fi stuff. For what part of what you're saying is that you can kind of tweak the laws in your favor of gameplay.
Have you read Isaac Asimov's like robot murder mystery novels? Like that would be inspiration. Naked Sun and Caves of Steel.
That and the Measure of a Man, The Trial of Data, and Star Trek also.
That's good. Yeah, that's excellent.
Or aliens showing up and going like, well, we're going to destroy Earth unless you can prove like the trial of humanity, where you're like going like, here's all the bad stuff humanity's done, here's all the good stuff humanity's done. In the end, humanity saved or destroyed.
Not looking good.
Yeah. there's a broad history. Maybe you can argue.
Looks even worse.
We're getting better. Maybe ups and downs, trends.
Well, I roped all four of you into this. Thank you so much for giving generously of your time on a Saturday. Al, I know you're actually in the office. That's terrifying. Dan interrupted the date. Sam came at the last minute. Talia, the only one on this panel who owes me favors. So, I very much appreciate it. It was an excellent discussion, and I look forward to all of your additional work for all four of you. Thank you all, and have a terrific weekend. And thanks for those of you who tuned in, and enjoy the rest of Second Front.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for having us and for all the good questions.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for watching.